Call it, Simon.
Right, good afternoon and welcome to our Schools Forum meeting of the 20th of January. My name's Simon Dallimore, I'm Chair. So welcome to everybody, observers and any members of the public. The agenda was published on the 12th of January and distributed to members. The agenda pack is available on the Council's website. Please can people turn off all videos and put yourselves on mute. Schools Forum members, please only use the video and microphones when speaking. This does help with background noise, call quality and anything disrupting the meeting. When I invite a member to speak, please clearly state who you are for the benefit of all to help identify who is speaking. If referring to a report, please refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Can forum members only use the meeting chat function, only for the purpose of the meeting, primarily to indicate to myself, the chair, that you wish to speak, or use the hand facility in Microsoft Teams. Anything in the chat will not be included in the minutes, so please raise the hand function to indicate that you wish to speak. There is a facility in Microsoft Teams under the ellipsis button called Turn on Live Captions, which provides subtitles on the screen. The meeting will be recorded, as with other public meetings of the Council. The recording will be made available following the meeting on the Schools Forum website. We will be using AI to support the minutes of the meeting. This means there will be some emphasised and repeated phrases. Please introduce yourself the first time you speak to assist the tool in identifying speakers. All recordings and transcripts, including those using AI, are subject to the Council Data Protection Policy. To help the flow of the meeting, we will be using a single slide pack to take us through the agenda, and that takes us to item 1, apologies for absence. Robin, please could you list any apologies?
Had apologies from Katie Boys and probable apologies from Naomi Philp. She may join us later in the meeting.
Thank you very much, Robin. So that brings us to item 2, and I would like to give a warm welcome to our new members. And please, briefly, if they could introduce themselves. So we have Nick Heath, who's an Academy Primary member.
Hello, good afternoon. Nick Heath here from the Area Community Academy Trust.
Thank you very much, Nick, and welcome. And we have Laurie Davies from the LA Maintained Primary.
Hi, I'm Laurie Davis. I'm at Wiki Primary School, been ahead just over a year.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so item 3, declarations of interest. I would invite any members to declare any interests. No, okay. In which case we will go to item 4, submitted public question time. There were no public questions received by the deadline of 5 o'clock on the 16th of January, which brings us to item 5, minutes of the previous meeting. Members will need to agree the minutes of the 25th of November. I had a quick scan. I couldn't find any outstanding actions, but if you do have any issues with the minutes, please could you identify it by page number, and can you make us aware by putting your hand up? Okay, in absence of any identified issues, we will vote to approve the minutes. So please can I ask all those in favour of approving the minutes to put your hands up, please, using the raise hand function in Teams. Okay, and have you captured that, Robin?
Yes, I have.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. People would like to lower their hands. Okay, so that now takes us to item 6, the de-delegated contingency. This is an item for decision. This vote is only for LA maintained representatives. I'd like to invite Jo Curry, Strategic Business Partner, Education, to present.
Thank you, Simon. As you said, this is an item for decision for LA maintained representatives only, and it is actually going to be a decision just for LA maintained primary representatives. And I think we've only got one. I think Robin, I'm just messaging Robin asking her, we've only got one on the call today. Is that right? I just confirm that before I move on.
That is correct at the moment, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure whether we can actually take a vote, whether that's sufficiently quorate to actually take a vote on this, but I need to just go through it because we have been through the process of consultation, and we've presented this back in September, and this is for the 26-27 schools block. So we'll go ahead and we'll do the vote with the one we've got on the line, and then we'll take it away and decide whether or not we need to. Yeah, Laurie, do you want to come in? Sorry, Simon.
Yeah, because I have messaged Robin about this to say literally this is my first ever meeting, so I was like, this is a lot, you know, even out of 4 people, but if it's just me making this decision, I've got about 1 million questions, so I'll just put that out there. It's quite, you know, it's a big ask for me to make a decision for 99 schools.
Yes, I do realise that. I don't know whether Simon, it's probably not conventional, but do we want to just discuss what we do in this situation, because I'm not that comfortable either with just one representative making a decision on behalf of all LA maintained schools. Whether Robin, you got any advice on what we do here?
Yeah, we need to follow legal process. So I think if we refer to Robin in a moment where we are in terms of the constitution of the forum, and I should know this, but it's the first time we've encountered this since I've been chairing. I don't think it hurts for you to present. That can go into the minutes, and it might be we have to look at whether we have to convene a meeting of just those people and whether that is constitutional without the rest of the forum. I don't know, but we can examine that. I think if you present, we can hear what the arguments are. It will go into the minutes, and then we've captured that, and then we'll find out where the legal position is.
Okay, I'll go ahead then. Okay, so do you want to move on to the next slide? Thank you, Robin. So this item is just for local authority maintained representatives only, and we have changed this slightly to be LA maintained primary schools only, and that's because we're expecting only to have one secondary maintained school next year in 26-27, so we can't really set up a fund for one individual school, so we switched this to just LA maintained primary schools. So this came back to Schools Forum in September, and we proposed setting up a contingency fund for schools in financial difficulty. And the background to this is just a growing number of LA maintained schools coming into a sort of deficit position. And I've listed there, at the time I put this together, we had 22 expected to go into deficit by 31st of March 2026. And we're expecting around £2 million of deficits for those 22 schools. And that's quite a significant increase from March 2025, where we had 13 schools in deficit with £721,000 of deficits. And there's a complex range of factors that contribute to that growing deficit position, which some of which were listed out on our consultation. So all options need to be looked at by the local authority, because some of these potential risks might fall on the local authority at some point. For example, if we need to close a school, so we need to look at all options in dealing with these school deficits. We did run a consultation, and feedback was gathered during November and December 2025. So I've got a slide on that just to cover what the feedback was. And that was we had a mixture of feedback from head teachers, from governors, and from school business managers. Just move on. So just a bit more information on why such a fund is necessary. So I'm sure, and I know we had some comments about this, the reasons why schools get into financial difficulties are not always in their control. Sometimes they are in their control, but sometimes that's not the case. And I've listed a few examples out below. So we are facing now quite a significant drop in the number of pupils coming through. So I think we had a drop of about 1% in last year, but this year, between October 24 and 25, there is a big drop in the number of primary school pupils coming through. I think it's something like 2.2% for primary schools, and some primary schools are facing drops of 5% or more. So there are some quite significant reductions. And as you know, pupil numbers equals funding. So the less pupils we have, the less funding, and that's going to impact every school, not just LA maintained ones. In some cases, we've got staffing issues. So where a school is just sort of being able to balance its budget, it might have an issue where, I don't know, a head or something goes, or a senior member of staff goes off sick, and we need to replace that member of staff, and that results in the school going into deficit. That's out of their control, and that's one of the reasons why some schools have gone into deficits or getting into financial difficulties. And another example there, just significant investment being required for example, for a poor Ofsted result. And just today, the vote was intended to be around actually establishing the fund. So a vote just to set the fund up and the value of that, and the criteria and the governance and the way we distribute that fund would need to be looked at subsequent to that vote taking place. So we need to obviously make sure we set that up so there's no incentive for schools to go into further deficits to draw on that fund. So that's that slide. Thank you. So I just wanted to draw your attention to the feedback from the consultation. So we did get quite a good response. This one, we had 27 respondents, and that's about 1 in 3 of our LA maintained schools, and 41% of those agreed to establishing that fund, so 11 out of the 27. A further 6 said maybe, depending on the criteria, I suspect. So that brings us up to 62%. So a sort of in favour of establishing such a fund. And then there was a further question around the amount for the fund, the deduction per pupil, and not everybody answered that question, but of the 15 that did answer, we did have 6 saying that they wanted to vote for the smallest fund, and that was the biggest group, so 40% voted for the smallest amount. I just wanted to draw your attention. We did have quite a lot of concerns raised in the 10 comments, the 10 unique comments that we received. I just wanted to read some of those out to you because they obviously raised some issues which just need to be taken into account. So somebody said we are going without many things and struggling on skeleton staff just to stay balanced. So we literally don't have anything to give. We do not agree that schools with a surplus should be made to fill the gaps of another school's deficit due to poor financial management or poor leadership. And I fear that the fund will not be sufficient to cover the deficit for schools within the LA, and unless it continues over a prolonged period, will be of no real benefit. And that's certainly one of my concerns as well, that we set up a fund, a small fund, and a lot of processes around that for not a significant amount of not a significant result. So that's just to draw your attention to that. Next slide. Thank you. So this I slightly tweaked this since I brought it to you in September, because we've changed the fund to just primary schools only. So the amount of the contingency has also dropped a bit. So we've gone to £72,500. And that's an average of about £800. Obviously, it's based on the number of pupils in the school. So if you've got a 420 place school, then it potentially is a deduction of £2,100 on your budget, but that will be the maximum amount for a £5 contingency. And then obviously up to the biggest option, which is £30, which is a significant, I think that's about £12,500 for a 420 place school. So that's a slightly bigger impact on the budgets. And just to remind everybody that we did make a one-off distribution of 3 years interest earlier this year, or last year, sorry, in 2025, and that did give LA maintained schools a bit of a boost to their budgets, which was an average of £10,000 per school, just under 10,000, or recognising that that's obviously only for schools with surplus balances at that point. So I think that's it. Then I think that the decision that I was going to propose, so decision would just be voting on the principle of establishing such a fund for schools in financial difficulty, which is a straight yes, no vote. And then if yes, then I just wanted to vote on the size of the fund and the 4 options that I put forward there. So that's the end of the slides. And then I think the next one is just questions and comments. That's it. That's
Okay, so let's first go to any questions or comments about the proposal. Yeah, Laurie.
Hi, I thought I might as well add the things that I thought of in the first place. But I mean, if people are saying maybe, but without the criteria in place, we could potentially get 62% in favour of it if the criteria were made clear before agreeing to give the money over, because then that could be sitting there for a period of time waiting for decision on how it's going to be managed. I mean, I will flag my school is on the list of schools in deficit, so I sort of have an interest, but I'm trying to be very neutral about this. I also feel that 40% of a third is not really an endorsement of it at the moment. It doesn't feel like it's in place and organised enough for people to be voting for it. That was my general feeling. And if we go with the smallest, it won't touch the side. So as you say, it needs to be an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments? Yeah, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. Susan Fielden, representing primary academies. So not a direct contribution in relation to the important decision, but two thoughts, if I may. One is just a clarification of, if by any strange chance, due to delay or uncertainty or whatever, that you don't spend, you pull together a contingency but you don't spend it, what happens to it at the end of the year, and does it just get lost in the overall deficit? So right. And the other one, which is a bit of a red herring, so please set it to one side and don't worry about answering it right now. But I notice on the paper that there are a number of special schools and AP settings with deficits that are not to be addressed by this proposal, and I wondered if at the next meeting, if that's going to be an opportunity to look at high needs funding, whether something could come back to the forum on that, simply because special schools and AP settings get all of their money from the local authority. They have no choice in the level of funding, and it's supposed to cover full costs. So slightly disconcerted by that level of deficit. Obviously needing to declare an interest in terms of the Oak Partnership and the ongoing challenges around Hillview, but just that level of funding for special schools and AP settings, and if that's resulting in a deficit, how does that play out? But that's not to do with today's decision, so please park that and ignore me.
We've got a couple of items this afternoon that just touch on some of the issues around the high needs block, but I did intend, we have got a meeting in early March where I think we'll hopefully cover a bit more detail in terms of the high needs block budgets and how those look.
Absolutely. Okay, Robin, I don't know if you managed in that time to extract a forum constitution decision about one member, or are we assuming that isn't core and we need to just capture what we've got and move on?
So the guidance and the DFE guidance, as well as our constitution, is that all decisions require 40% quoracy, which means that we aren't. But it was something that was discussed after the last meeting as well, in terms of constitutional changes this year, about making it really clear what quoracy looks like for our maintained representatives, because there are decisions that they have to take without the input of other members. So it's about making sure that process is cleared up. So on that basis, we cannot take a decision today. It would need to be pushed to the next meeting.
Thank you for that very clear.
So I think that will be, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Robin. I think that will be too late for this year's schools formula to be approved. So we will have to park that until 27-28. It is a single year decision anyway. So we'll come back to that. We'll revisit it in future.
Okay. In
That's
which
all
case,
we can do, I think.
thank you, Jo.
Yep.
Okay. Right, so let's move on, because we've obviously got a very busy schedule today. We've got item 7. This item's got the most time set aside for it. Item 7, distribution of schools block. This item is for decision. I would invite Jo Curry, Strategic Business Partner in Education, to present.
Okay, thank you, Simon. So this affects everybody, and this is to do with the distribution of the 26-27 DSG schools block. And we do need to make a decision on that today. So let's move on. So this shows you the DSG schools block allocation for 26-27 compared to 25-26. And you can see that we've had an increase in funding of £17.75 million, and that's 4.2%. And as always, that's not the actual increase that schools have received. The actual increase is 2.313% in the funding formula, and the rest of it will be rolling in the grants that have been grossed up for the full year. So that's the National Insurance Contributions Grant and the Schools Budget Support Grant. And after taking account of those, Somerset got a little bit more than the average quoted by the DfE, so we were at 2.18% increase, which is better, I have to say, than the previous year, which I think we calculated at something like 0.6%. So there is a little bit more funding gone into education this year from the DfE. So this is a table just showing you the impact, as I mentioned earlier, of the drop in pupil numbers. So you can see that particularly for primary now, that fall in the birth rate is having an impact on that sector. So we've lost 2.2% of primary age pupils between October 24 and October 25. And put a smaller proportion flowing through to the secondary group, which is only 0.4%. I have taken a little bit of accountant's license on the number of schools, because we have got middle schools and those pupils sit between primary and secondary, but the average reduction in pupils is 4 for primary and 4 for secondary. And as noted in the notes, 32% of primaries and 43% of middles now have a drop in pupils of over 5%. And the protections that we get, so minimum funding guarantee and minimum per pupil levels, don't protect against falling rolls. So that is now having quite a big impact on our funding. Move on. So there's quite a lot on this slide. So as in previous years, the allocation of schools block doesn't meet the hard national funding formula for 26-27, but we are permitted to move within certain ranges for the factors. So we can meet still within, we are within the DfE range, and we're not permitted to set a deficit budget, so we have to adjust it. And we haven't received confirmation yet of our 0.5% disapplication request, and we're trying to chase that, but I'm not sure whether we're going to get that. The deadline for the submission of the APT is this Thursday, so we're still waiting for that from the DfE. So what we've had to do is produce, or rather I say we, Jackie has produced 2 options within 2 separate APTs, the big spreadsheet, and then we shared that with you in the papers with a list of the impacts on individual schools. So we're just going to ask you today to consider both of the scenarios and vote for one favoured option for both scenarios, which makes it slightly more complicated. We have within both options this year gone for setting the minimum funding guarantee at minus 0.5%. I think previously we've held it at 0%. I think we need to vote on that as well today. The impact is only £73,000 in total, but I think there are something like 23, I think I wrote down 23 schools that are impacted by that. So we just need to be comfortable. We need to vote on that. Obviously, if we switch that back to 0%, then we'll have to find that £73,000 across the remaining schools. So that does change the calculation. And none of the options will impact any schools protected at the other protection, which is the minimum per pupil levels. It's that one. Thank you. So this big table shows you our shortfall this year. So the amount needed to fund the hard national funding formula was 400 the gap between the amount needed for the national funding formula and the funding that we received is 2.348 million. So it's pretty similar to last year. We are going to use £283,000 of the growth fund to fund growing schools, and therefore our gap is 2.065 million, which is just under 0.5% of the total schools block. And just to note on here, I've also highlighted that the 0.5% transfer, which we don't have any decision on yet, is a further £2.173 million. And then if that is applied to the schools block, then that is just under a 1% reduction in terms of the total funding to schools budgets. So that will give you a feel for what your budgets will have to be reduced by to cover those 2 items, around 1%. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so this is a slide showing the impact on the ARPU, so that's the age-weighted pupil unit funding element of the schools block. So that is approximately 75% of the total funding. So we've modelled two options here. So with no transfer, we have to reduce the ARPU by 0.67%. With a transfer, we have to reduce the ARPU by 1.43%. And that's the option which Schools Forum has voted for the last 2 years, just to impact the ARPU. And the DfE sets the range for the ARPU at 2.5% above and below its hard funding formula. So you can see on here, for example, the primary sector, the hard funding for the NFF is £4,064, and the lower limit is 3,962, the upper limit 4,166. The 0.67 cut is £27 per pupil, and £58 for the 1.43%. So you can see that in both scenarios we are still within the ranges permitted, and we've still got a bit to play with, albeit it's only about £40 for the 1.43% cut. Okay, that's that one. And then we also have produced only one additional blended option this year. We haven't produced a capping option because I think based on feedback we've had previously and our own feeling about capping having an impact on those schools that basically need the sort of biggest increases, then we've just produced a scaling option, and obviously a range of numbers could be produced, but this is where we've gone. So with the no transfer, we've scaled by 8% and reduced the ARPU by 0.4%. And then with a block transfer, we've scaled by just under 20% and reduced the ARPU by 0.85%. And the table below just shows you that we're still just about within those ranges for the DfE. The DfE requires the 2.5% either way. So that is that option. I won't dwell on this too much, but I've just pulled out some of our comparator local authorities. I think there are only a couple of things I just wanted to say on this, that they're not using any, or the ones that I can find, because it's actually quite hard to find this information, none of them are using any capping or scaling. They're all reducing the ARPU. So I thought that was quite interesting for the information I could find. They are, Dorset has produced some options on MFG and minus 0.5 and 0, but the other two are setting it at 0. Interestingly, they're all going for the 0.5% transfer, the ones I can find, and there's a range of a range of reasons why a safety valve, I think, is expected. They'd have the transfer, but the other two have also requested a transfer, one of which was approved by Schools Forum and one of which was approved by the DfE. So that's just our comparator. Those authorities are within our F40 group, which is the lowest funded local authorities in terms of DSG funding in the country. So that's that. In terms of growth fund, we've got a very similar amount for the growth fund for 26-27 that we've had in 25-26. So it's only a small reduction of £19,000. And this table just shows you our current budgets. So our forecast actually for the growth fund spend this year is to be slightly overspent. And we haven't made any proposals to use a block, an amount from the growth fund to contribute from the schools block, and that's because we're largely expecting that to spend the money that we're forecasting on growth at just over £1 million next year on schools that are growing, and that is true for this year's forecast. So it's quite difficult to contribute any amount from the growth fund to the main schools block. So that's the growth fund. And this just summarises the decisions I think we need to take today. So obviously comments and questions. So we need to vote on application of the minimum funding guarantee. I suppose that's either 0 or minus 0.5. And then we need to vote on both options. So an APT with no block transfer in it. So that's reducing by ARPU or a combination scaling and ARPU. And then on the block transfer, it's the same two options, so reduction on ARPU or a blended option. So those are the decisions I think we need to take today. That I think is the end.
Okay,
yes,
thank you very much, Jo. Before we go to questions and comments, I think into the minutes probably need to put that obviously Schools Forum rejected the 0.5% transfer. So although we clearly can see that other local authority has been agreed by the DFE, and it's quite possible this will be. I think at this point, even though today we are going to vote for a preferred option should it happen, it's our Schools Forum preference that it doesn't happen at all. But there is a pragmatic element to this, and given the timing. So noting that, I'll go to questions and comments. Susan Fielden, please.
Thank you. You've just made one of the points I was going to make. I wonder whether we could be even stronger from the Schools Forum and urge the local authority to not do a block transfer regardless of whatever the DFE decide, because what the DFE decide is to give us approval to do it. We don't. I believe you don't necessarily have to if they say yes, you could. And I think in the light of the continued inadequate funding for the NFF, it would be unwise and go contrary to supporting inclusion in mainstream schools to reduce the school's budget to top up high needs. The other point I wanted to make was having had a look at the numbers, I venture to suggest a third option, which would be to maintain the percentage increase, year-on-year increase that the NFF includes, and to use the baseline of our Somerset AWPU values from last year, so that what Somerset schools get is the same percentage increase from last year, albeit starting from a lower base. And I think those numbers are slightly different from the options that have been presented, but for me that's got some real logic in reflecting the national increase, albeit from our reduced baseline. And having thrown that option towards Joe and Jackie earlier on in the week, I wondered if they had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can come in there. So looking at the option without the transfer, the option that Susan's mentioned would actually give a lower ARPU. So I haven't actually modelled that because we can afford a higher ARPU anyway, under our option 1. The scenario it might come into effect is if we do have the transfer in there. So if we did do the transfer, Susan's option would come out very similar to our blended one. Very small difference between the two.
I think if I may come back, I think for me it's about the narrative that we're not cutting back. It's a narrative about not cutting back necessarily from the NFF, but reflecting the year-on-year, the same year-on-year increase that's been allocated nationally, and it takes you to the same place, but it's a slightly more positive spin on the difficult situation.
I'll let Amelia come in.
Yeah, Amelia, please.
Yeah, I was just going to back Susan's point. I think the way that the NFF is constructed, it creates a kind of an artificial benchmark for us to say, you know, that we can't deliver on the NFF. Well, actually, what it is, it's a disparity between different timescales and different data sets. The data set is what it is. So I would back Susan's reflections, and the allocation to the county is in line with the rest of the country. I think the NFF point has always been a difficulty for us because of those moving data points and how that then doesn't reflect that calculation. So I would agree entirely.
So presumably that variation to the calculation has to be fed through the APT. Jackie would know this better than me. In terms of cuts to ARPU and scaling, anyway, we can't sort of apply it strictly as Susan's described it, or can we?
Not if it's the option without the transfer, because it would actually give us a worse off position than we've already got there. Because the percentage cut that we're having to make below the NFF is actually smaller for 26/7 if we don't do the transfer than it was in 25/6.
So that's a bonus, isn't it?
It is a bonus. So your thing would only come into play, Susan, if we had to do the transfer, and then we could apply your method, which would give a slightly different result from our second option. Yeah, I can understand the logic behind what you're saying there.
If I may, could I modify my proposal that in the first instance that you avoid doing the transfer, but if you absolutely have to, then to at least ensure that the AWPU has increased by the same percentage as the NFF has increased, and then do any balancing you need to do on scaling.
We've been given some advice actually this afternoon by the DfE to submit our APT without the transfer in it, and if we do not get a decision in time, so that will be the APT that we submit will be the one without the transfer. So are we saying that we still need to, in terms of without the transfer, we vote on the options that we've presented, so the cut in the ARPU is the best option, or the scaling?
Go for either option, whichever people think is fairest, really.
Yeah.
My sense is that there's some highly technically capable people who've just spoken, and what you've just said will be, oh, this is no disrespect to the members of Forum, right? That was a struggle to follow that conversation. There's a level of opacity to the. My worry is that we vote on an option where, you know, we are at different levels of understanding of what just been described, as opposed to kind of spreadsheets where we've been able to look at it and understand the implications. So I think if we're going to look at that third option, we probably need to unpick it a little bit more, because my sense is previously the reason, I could be wrong here, so I'm happy for members to interject and go, Simon, your memory is completely wrong. My sense is the reason we've gone with just the ARPU change in previous years is effectively Forum isn't making any choices, you know, of one school against another, or coming up with kind of artificial advantaging or disadvantaging schools on the basis of this. In a way, ARPU is just relentlessly blind in the way that it is. If we did this third model, there's a number of schools who aren't affected on the minimum per pupil. Does that shift? Do we end up with any losses being on a smaller or a bigger number of schools as a result of this? I can't, because to be honest, I'm struggling to quite calculate this in my head.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the detail, I think what we're saying is for no block transfer, the options that we've presented are the best in terms of the scenario that Susan's described. Jackie, you can confirm that. Is that right?
Yeah, so if we just go with a cut in the ARPU, we would have to cut less than Susan's option, basically.
Yeah.
So if people want to stick with just ARPU only, we would go with our option there, because it would give a better result.
Yeah.
If people think the blended one is fairer on principle, obviously you've got to just debate that, really, because that would then scale back some of the schools, about all the schools that have got to gain by a certain amount.
Yeah, so we've already shared those figures with you in terms of the no transfer option, and that's the one we'll be submitting on Thursday. So hopefully we can still vote on that based on the information that we shared before the meeting, because that's all set out in the appendix, school by school, and including the MFG. The impact for those 23 schools is set out on those appendices. So I'm hoping we can vote on that one. In terms of the other option, there will be a slight tweak, I expect, and I think you've modelled that, Jackie, haven't you?
Yes, it comes out very close to our option 4,
Blended.
which is the blended one with the transfer in.
So in terms of that one, I know you've probably got it in front of you. Are there any significant, because we're talking about sometimes when we tweak numbers here and there, we're talking about a few £100 here and there.
Yes. I think there was 28 schools only that were over £1,000, and the maximum difference was 3,000.
Okay.
So there's just a few £100 difference for most schools.
Oh, and were those primarily, because £3,000 on a secondary school budget, I mean, every penny counts, but it's not like a massive £3,000 on a small primary.
Yeah, they were either a big primary or a secondary. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's great. Okay, Amelia.
It was just a question, really, procedurally, because we don't know the outcome of the block transfer decision. If that's clearer, Schools Forum can take a vote on the no block transfer. That would give us a steer.
I wonder whether we just need an indication, because ultimately this is an advisory decision. We do abide by the decisions of Schools Forum, but the statutory responsibility resides with the local authority. Ultimately, if Schools Forum is happy to accept the expert view of Joe, Jackie, and Susan in relation to that decision, I think we could. I'm asking colleagues if they would be content for effectively to say that they will leave that decision to us based on the things that have been discussed and optimizing the outcome for schools based on this discussion.
I think we have to take a vote on 3 different options in terms of that block transfer decision. I think we need to.
Yeah, I think so. And
Yeah.
I think what we'll need to do is, because this is quite complex and for my help as well, I don't know if you're able to put the slide on there that has the options, so that as people are considering
Just
option 1, 2, 3, etc., that they can have something to refer back to, and we'll have to obviously talk them through the third one we've just talked about now. Okay.
So,
I was going to say, are there any other questions or comments before we move on to?
I just want to say, just in terms of the block transfer, I do accept Susan's point about it having an impact on all schools, and the amount is, it's not a decision that anybody, we don't take that decision lightly, but it has been through our governance processes and been through executive and full council, and that was basically approved by them to go forward. So I think it'd be very difficult for us as a local authority to not then go ahead and make that transfer should it be approved. I just thought better just say that.
Laurie Davies.
Hi, as you said, Simon, it's quite a lot, and there's lots of knowledgeable people talking about things that they live and breathe. And again, this is my first meeting. I don't want to vote on something, but I absolutely trust those people who are talking, and I've dealt with many times. So are you able to tell us what your preferred option is, or is that not guidance that you're able to give?
Well, I don't think I can necessarily sway you towards a vote. I mean, there are pros and cons of each option. As soon as you get into the realms, and maybe I'll bring Jackie and she can explain it a bit better than me in terms of the actual detail on scaling, sort of pros and cons of scaling. I don't know, Jackie, you can.
Yes, obviously scaling only affects those schools that have got a gain per pupil. The reason they've got a gain per pupil will either be because their deprivation and their attainment factors, for example, have got worse between the 2 years, or their pupil numbers might have changed significantly. So you would be reducing the impact on everybody and taking more from schools that are gaining on their per pupil. So it's whether people consider that is in principle something they'd want to do. The capping option we looked at was much more drastic in that it targeted a much smaller number of schools. And some of those were gaining by quite a high percent, so they would have lost a lot of money on the capping option, which we had done in previous years, but we've discounted that because it really did have a significant effect on a small number of schools. So the scaling is fairer than capping, we consider. The scaling amount there, 8%, is not huge. If we have to go to the transfer option, obviously it more than double, so it's whether people want to go with simple and cut the ARPU by a higher amount, which will affect everybody by a higher amount there, or whether they think that schools that are gaining should contribute a bit more than everybody. But obviously that gain is generally going to be because they deemed to have more need because their factors have got worse on deprivation and attainment.
Yeah, that's really clear. And I think, as I understand it, we need your expert calculation, but that schools need to give the view from schools. So I think you're right not to identify a model. But I think what we're saying about that Susan's model is the principle of that, but you'll have to go and do the actual, because there is a technical balancing to be done once you take that kind of underlying principle forwards.
Yeah.
Right. Are
Yeah, so
there
I
any?
think
Yeah, sorry, please.
that just gives us an additional option, I think, on the block transfer, doesn't it? It gives us an option
Yeah.
3, which is sort of Susan's model, for want of a better description. But I think by the sounds of things, it doesn't actually change a lot of the numbers. We can circulate those numbers after the meeting if everybody would like to see them, and if there's a preference to take that option if we get the block transfer approved.
Susan.
I just wondered if what was worth me one more go at trying to clarify what I was suggesting. So if there's no block transfer, then I would suggest that we're going with AWPU only. And if there is a block transfer, then the AWPU is protected insofar as it receives the same percentage increase as the national formula does, albeit on our local baseline, and then whatever the balance is that you need to do to take that from scaling.
Yeah, so it would produce a 0.98% cut on ARPU and a 15.7, I think, scaling under your option.
Okay, so that would become option 3. Sorry, number 3 on option 2.
Yeah.
Amelia.
Yeah, can I just suggest that because I think that was very helpful, Susan, but if there's going to be a vote on 3 options, maybe someone could just write them in the chat so that there is so people can see that when they're voting on it, just so we're really clear what people are voting on if it's not in the papers and on the screen. Would that be okay?
Jackie, just to confirm.
Jackie, can you just confirm
on option 3?
What the other one is.
Yeah, so option 2 is actually an ARPU reduction of, I think it's 0.85, which I've realised I've missed off on my option 2 under the block transfer. But
yeah, so Jackie, if you could just write what 1, 2, and 3 are in the chat so that people can see what those 3 are if they're going to vote on them, just so we're clear. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we'll do is when we come to the vote in a moment, we will start with option 1 and we will go for voting for 1, voting for 2, or for abstaining. And then we will go with the caveat that Schools Forum strongly are advising the local authority not to undertake the 0.5% reduction. I understand the nuance on that you've given us back about the local authority's position, because I do think that, you know, if you put more pressure onto the mainstream schools to provide need for pupils, you will quite likely risk more students going into very expensive special needs, and you know, I think it could be significantly counterproductive. And we went through those arguments at the last forum. Okay, so
sorry, Simon. Can I just say we just need to vote on the application of the minimum funding guarantee as well first, whether we set that at minus 0.5 or 0.
That is a very good point. Okay, and
well.
So what's the can you talk us through before we vote on that one? So the option really is, I mean, clearly you can scale that to 0.4, 0.3, etc. But the difference is the position, well, as was 0, and the position of going to minus 0.5, because it's been quite a lot of technical discussion since then. So that one in particular, can you just talk us through again the impact if people decide to go minus 0.5 as opposed to staying at 0?
Yeah, okay. I will say what I can, and then I'll bring Jackie in if there's anything I've missed. So the application of the minimum funding guarantee at minus 0.5% affects 23 schools, and most of them are sort of less than 5k, the impact on those schools. And there is one, I think, middle school that has a reduction of £19,000 if we did apply the MFG at minus 0.5%. So we could revert that to 0%, but that would give us an additional £73,000 that we need to find to balance the schools block. So if we set it at 0%, that will change our options in terms of the ARPU. The ARPU might be 0.73% or something we might have to cut, but then the impact is felt across more schools. So it will cut more schools' budgets as opposed to initially taking the 73% using a minus 0.5% MFG. I'll let Jackie come in if there's anything I've missed or I've
yeah, so we'd have to do a slightly higher cut on ARPU, like you said. if we don't,
Yeah.
if we set the MFG at 0%, because more schools will get protection, it will cost us more on MFG. Therefore, we'll have to cut something else by more.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so as I and I don't want to summarize something and get it wrong. So what we're doing is by moving it to minus 0.5, we're including a bigger balance of schools who are experiencing a negative reduction. And the reason that those schools are not in the 0.5, they were the ones who wouldn't be affected at 0, is because they've got lower levels of deprivation. Is that they're already at a minimum fund, or what?
So that should be their factors are actually improving between the 2 years, or their pupil numbers might have changed substantially, which might affect the amount per pupil as well.
Okay, so that's a slightly different nuance then. Okay, that was really helpful, Jackie. Thank you. Right, before we do, so we're going to start on application of the MFG. Does anybody have any last questions or queries about this, the vote on the application? So the choices will be leave it at 0, go to minus 0.5, or to abstain. Before we do that, are there any last questions? Because I know this is technically difficult. No. Okay, in which case we will go to a vote on application of the MFG. We'll start with reducing to minus 0.5. So it will be a hands up for that, and then I'll ask for a 0 to leave it where it is, and then I'll ask for an abstain. Okay, so we'll start with hands raised, please, for vote on up to apply the MFG at minus 0.5%. Okay, those votes look stable. Robin, have you managed to capture that?
I have. That was a unanimous vote.
Thank you very much, Robin. So I don't need to go to the other two options unless you think I technically do, but if it's unanimous, I don't think so. But I'll just, right, for clarity, just so that, because this involves significant funding, I don't think I do, but I'll just say it in case somebody has messed up. If we can lower hands where we are, so we should have no hands, and I'm just going to double check. So votes in affirmation of 0% and votes to abstain. No, that's fine. It was a unanimous vote and everybody is happy. Right, so we will move to option 1, assuming the possibility that there is no block transfer. We're going to go, we've just got 2 things to vote. So the choices will be number 1, the vote on reduction only on the ARPU by 0.67. Vote 2, vote on the reduction on the ARPU and include the scaling, or abstain. Okay, so can I have hands up, please, for option 1, choice 1, reduction on the ARPU only? Okay, Robin, did we capture that?
That was another unanimous decision.
That's fine, thank you. I'm just for completeness, I'm dotting I's and crossing T's here, given the money involved. So I'm just double checking if we can have all the hands down. Were there any for vote 2, option 2? Sorry, not option 2, number 2 on option 1. No. Okay, and was there any abstentions we might have missed? No. Okay, so that was a unanimous vote. Right, so we're now going to go to option 2. If there is a block transfer to the higher needs block, and there will be 3 choices, 1, 2, and the one in the chat now. Option number 3, we'll do votes for 1, votes for 2, votes for 3, and then abstain. Okay, so let's go. Option 2, block transfer, choice 1. Hands up, please. Okay, I see no hands up. We will move to option 2, choice 2. Can I have hands up for that choice, please? And then option 2, choice 3, if we can have hands up for that, please. And Robin, have you captured that? I don't think that was as unanimous. Or I could be wrong. Are you happy you've captured that vote, Robin?
Yeah, I've got that one.
Okay, and do we have any, so I'll wait till the hands are down. And do we have any abstentions? Okay, thank you. That's great. Thank you to the technical expertise on that, the preparation, because I know the amount of time you are in a very tight window to prepare that, the amount of work that's gone in the background to produce that, you know, that clear set of data for us. My thanks to the local authority representatives for that. And we will now move on to item 8. Central School Services Block distribution of funding. This item is for decision, and I'd like to invite Amelia Walker, Service Director Education, to present.
Sorry, Simon, just taking a moment for that to come online. Hello, everyone. Thank you. We move to the next slide. Now, the Central School Services Block, for those of you who are long-standing members of Schools Forum, the Central School Services Block is the centrally retained funding by the local authority to provide services for schools as a whole. The funding we are proposed to receive by the government in 26-27 is 4.247 million, and there has been an increase for the core block, but a reduction of historic commitments. And some of you who have been around for a while will remember the long-standing debate around historic commitments. Historic commitments was established when the Central School Services Block was established some years ago. At that time, there were a number of local authorities who had commitments that couldn't be readily disengaged from, that were no longer eligible for funding in the CSSB. And so the historic commitments was established to enable local authorities to divest of those responsibilities. The difficulty that we have in Somerset is that one of those historic commitments is parent and family support advisor funding. So over the course of a number of years, we have divested of all other responsibilities from historic commitments. We are now in a position where we are cutting into the core funding to enable the PFSA funding to continue. So we'll go into that in more detail in a moment. So the reduction is currently 20% per annum from the historic commitment fund. Move to the next slide. So the areas that the Central School Services Block is permitted to fund are set out in the guidance in statute, and you can see the categories there that are permitted expenditure for the Central School Services Block. Copyright licenses are defined by the government, so that isn't something that can be varied. Education welfare, you can see that there has a proposed increase. The reason for that is that we have restructured our services as of the 1st of April 2025. So you remember there was a significant reorganization last year, and the teams that were that deliver our education engagements have focused on that direct work around primarily around attendance. They previously sat in the education service and now sit in alongside family intervention in a prevention service. And there's been a huge amount of work this year, really focusing that on direct work with children and families and integrating children's social care, family intervention service with education engagement. But in order for that to be based in localities so that there is a team in every locality in the county, the size of that team has had to increase, and that is where you see that 16.5% increase in the allocation to those responsible officers. Asset management has been removed as an area in terms of our internal relationship with our colleagues in has not received an increase. That's an internal activity that's delivered by our colleagues in property around some of the things that they do for the system as a whole in the property area. Statutory and regulatory, there are a number of things in that space. including things like careers and pathways, and our contribution to the funding that we get from the Careers and Enterprise company, which brings significant value into the county and enables us to deliver services for all schools. School admissions obviously is another statutory function, and we have a team that undertakes that on behalf of all schools. And Schools Forum obviously is the support that we have for this meeting. So in total, the increase received from the government was 3.5%, and you can see the distribution there. Final element obviously is around historic commitments and the parent and family support advisors, and we have discussed this many times. The pressure first emerged last year, and we were able to identify a sufficient funding to continue the level of commitment for 25-26. The issue that we're now facing for 26-27 is that there is a £325,000 reduction, but that if you add to that the sum that was increased to last year, there's quite a significant gap from the total commitments of the PFSA workforce, which is 1.783 million. So the gap is in the region of £500,000. What we'll be looking for from Schools Forum today, we are still looking to offset to the greatest extent that we can. We are aware that PFSAs continue to do extremely critical work across the county, and they are mitigating escalation into SEND and into children's social care, but the money simply isn't there to meet the full cost of the system. So what we'll be looking for from Schools Forum is to take an indicative vote on two possible options to reduce expenditure. The funding that goes to schools is on the basis of a funding formula, and we could reduce that funding formula across the board. We take into account pupil numbers, but also some deprivation factors. And that would then, as we were seeing with ARPU, would distribute that reduction evenly. But obviously that would then have an impact where there are where people are employed, and that would result in possibly quite small gaps that are distributed across the piece, but that would potentially result in gaps for schools. We could also alternatively look at where there are vacancies. Now that would create an inequity because vacancies are not evenly distributed, but it would mean that we would have less pressure on people who are currently employed. So we're also, I think, open to any suggestions about other ways that we could mitigate in the short space of time that we have. But it is at this point in time very unlikely that we will be able to fill the gap. We will fill the gap as much as we are able, and we are just considering options at this time, and it depends slightly on some information we have that's still outstanding in other areas about the final budgets that will be set across the piece. But it is very unlikely we'll be able to meet the full sum. So view from Schools Forum on those two aspects would be helpful, as well as the formal vote on the Central School Services block as a whole. Happy to take any questions, Simon.
Yeah, hands up for comments or questions, please. Susan Fielden.
At the risk of introducing a third option, could I just ask a question about if you were to reduce the funding formula across the board, not from April, but from September, would not funding vacant posts in the summer term fill the gap? Just wondering whether that gives those who would need to try and work out what to do with reduced funding a bit more time to make that work.
So you mean withholding the funding? I mean, I think the issue. So
just conscious there's people employed with this funding, and
that's the critical issue in terms of timescales.
Somebody either needs to plug the funding gap, or contracts need to change, and none of that is going to be able to happen very quickly. So just wondering about buying some time.
Yeah, so I think the issue, if we don't fund funding, if we don't, so he says we the vacant post is suitable for the summer term because there's no one in them now, and therefore no action needs to be taken. But the funding formula, if it was reduced from September, then any changes to employment could be made within that time. And I suppose we could absolutely model that. And I think we're very conscious of timescales in terms of redundancy. I think we're very, very keen that we don't. I think the risk around cutting the funding formula across the board is that if what we had is a very large number of posts put under pressure, rather than concentrating that in some areas, it's just the distribution of risks. What we wouldn't want is to say, well, no one can afford to employ these members of staff. And focusing on vacancies just means that that's concentrated. It does obviously mean that that's an unfair distribution of impact across the county. But yes, we could look at that in terms of the summer term and timescales.
Ruth Hobbs.
Yeah, so my question was really around redundancy, because those would have needed to have been issued at this point. So it's a little bit late if we're going to be reducing funding down for those schools, because I just want to double check my understanding on this. PFSAs are employed by the schools, not by the local authority. Is that correct? So the schools will be taking any liability?
That's correct.
Okay.
Jo Curry.
Yeah, can I just add that I think we've funded PFSAs on an academic year. So whilst the funding looks like it's for a financial year, for the 25-26 pot, the money that we've given out, I think the communication is that it's for the academic year, not the financial year. So it does, the funding we've given out for the 1.623 does take us up to the summer of 2026, or schools up to the summer of 26.
Rebecca Bennett.
Hello, everybody. It's just a question about thinking about the question about funding of PFSAs. Again, I think I've asked this a few times before, but trying to understand what impact the current PFSA workforce is happening and whether there's data available on that.
So when you say data available, do you mean on who is employed and where, or what the workforce looks like? What's the data you're looking for?
Yeah, what impact this workforce is having on outcomes for children and young people in Somerset?
So we have anecdotal evidence only. There's never been an exercise to collect that data across the piece. I think the question is, I mean, it would be quite a significant piece of work for us to identify what those output indicators are. We've got a lot of positive anecdotal evidence, but there's never been an outcomes framework.
Yeah, and I guess I sat many years ago on the Early Help Commissioning Board, and it was a question that we were asking then, because obviously PFSA funding has always, certainly in recent years, has always been in question, hasn't it, around how do we afford this service? And I guess we're being asked to make decisions on funding a service that we cannot accurately demonstrate the impact that it has. Just an observation.
I would agree. I mean, I think just generally, I mean, one of the things that the Early Help colleagues working in that area have done is that they have worked really hard. They start from a baseline of not knowing who was employed where, and that we now have really good data to know exactly who the PFSA workforce are. And there's the supervision there's now group supervision of PFSAs. There's a kind of common framework, a network, and a lot of work has gone in to turn that into a workforce who have a shared kind of language and expectations, but not in terms of, as you're suggesting, a kind of outcomes framework. There is a big, partly because they're not employed by the local authority, there's no requirement that they operate to a common framework in terms of deliverables. So we could put something indicatively in place, but that's not their contract of employment. They're employed individually by individual schools. But
there has been some standardization, is that what you're saying?
There has been standardization. There is now a common approach, and they do come together as cohorts in areas with joint supervision. So there has been standardization because it was, hugely varied. But the structure in terms of how they are employed, they're not employed on common contracts. They don't have common expectations in terms of that job employment. Some of them are doing that part of the role as part of other things that they do. They're on different pay scales. It's not a standardized workforce like you would have with, as I said, with education engagement or social workers or any other kind of employees who are all employed by the same organisation.
Yeah, thank you very much for the clarity. Thank you.
Nick Heath.
Thanks. Amelia, you may not have the answer. Is the likely direction of travel that this would be the first of a series of reductions over the coming years, or is it hoped that this would be a one-off? Because obviously, if we're planning to reduce year on year, then that's something that schools might try and plan for. But if it's hoped that this funding might then either return or not be further reduced, that might affect one's decision.
It's a helpful point, Nick. I think there has always been a hope that we would be able to move this onto secure funding. And one of our prior directors who has now left, Richard, did spend a lot of time trying to identify alternative funding streams and negotiating with the NHS, for example. It's a lot of money and nobody in the county has got any money right now. I think the issue is that as in last year, we were able to find a certain amount of money to plug a gap. Every year that the quantum increases, the likelihood of finding money to fill the gap decreases, because the totality of almost £2 million, it seems inconceivable that we'll be able to identify a fund to fill that entire gap. So this fund is just going to reduce every single year for the foreseeable future. At this moment in time, we don't have any leads to a £2 million alternative that would keep this funding going. That doesn't mean that the landscape may not change in the future. And obviously there's funding coming through for things like family hubs, government focus on early intervention, and we are still anticipating a SEND white paper in the near future. That social care, there are significant reforms. So the reality is, in the public sector, the world changes. And it may be that this is something that would align with the future direction of travel that we're simply not aware of yet. So there's no guarantees about anything. On what we know today, there is no alternative funding to stop a 20% cut every single year.
Okay, thank you.
Amelia, if I can ask a question. In absence of a rigorous analysis, there is a risk that this is not a saving, that this is a cost. And that if, for example, this drove more children going to higher thresholds in social care or NHS or exclusions, whatever it might be, that actually there have these other organisations where outside of schools, where PFSAs are kind of a step below and are a reduced cost, have they really considered whether actually if this disappears out of schools, in a way, schools will lose capacity, but they will bear the cost?
Well, so I think I'm going to say who would that be? So we have spoken to the NHS. In reality, it's not primarily the NHS that would feel that. So I think this is why, if we can find some additional funding, our colleagues in children's social care, who is not someone other, it's Claire and Jane, that I work with every day. They're very aware of the work that PFSAs do. That doesn't mean that they have any cash to spend, because the council is under enormous pressure, and the overspending in children's social care is in the tens of millions, not anything less than that. So the pressure on children's social care is enormous. It's coming from general fund, and the local authority is under enormous financial pressure. The other area that is mitigating is in SEND, as we'll go on in a moment. The high needs block is under extraordinary pressure. Again, it's in the tens of millions, the overspending. So there is no source in the areas that it is offsetting. There is no source of money that isn't under extraordinary pressure. Unprecedented generational pressure that is putting the whole local authority at risk. So I think nobody thinks that this is that taking money out of historic commitments and PFSAs is a good idea. It's a really, really bad idea. At this moment in time, we don't have any avenue. There isn't any funding source that we can deploy where we're not already trying everything that is within our imagination and gift to try and reduce it already. And we have huge targets to try and reduce those budgets. So it's simply, there's just not enough money to deal with the level of need.
Yeah, absolutely. And my second question really is, because these are very skilled people, and also their value is also in those relationships that they have built in communities and with parents. And so this speaks to my thoughts about the two options is, if what I'm trying to work through is the consequences. So if we go with reduce funding formula across the board, is there a risk that some of these posts will go? Once they're gone, you aren't getting that knowledge or those relationships back in a hurry. Whereas if you don't fund the vacant posts, you're holding what you've got. And if more comes through in the white paper, we can use what we've got to build more. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, and I think that's why I just wanted to have this conversation here. Given that there are unknowns and reform is coming through, and a lot of change is going to need to be made in a number of areas, it feels like vacant posts, while that may create pressure for a period of time, is less likely to break the system while we're waiting to understand how the system needs to look going forward. So but I think that, because there would be a degree of inequity while we were looking for ways to mitigate this, I just think it's important we have this conversation here, just to try and find something that doesn't act prematurely, and potentially, as you say, lose posts or lose expertise, which we might then struggle to replace if the world changed. So I think we're dealing with too little information and not enough money. But I wanted to have the conversation here to give us a steer on what Schools Forum felt we could do to mitigate well, various things are kind of in the mix, and we don't have full information.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are no easy positions here. Susan.
I just wanted to reflect, this has been a really thoughtful conversation about a really important piece of the overall jigsaw, and I wonder whether I am encouraged by the thought about not funding vacant posts or in the interim whilst the world hopefully settles a little. But I do wonder whether there is any scope for actually commissioning that piece of work around understanding the impact, because that does seem to be the missing part of the jigsaw, to be really confident that this important role, these important people are fully connected to the landscape that we have in Somerset. Because if the funding is going to keep reducing year on year, then we need to really be understanding what we're investing in, and it feels like schools from their own budgets will need to be putting resource into this as we move forward, if the central funding isn't available, and to do that we need that clarity about impact.
So can I just get a view from colleagues whether there are members of this group who would be prepared just to spend a small amount of time with us to look at maybe some more root and branch models of looking at a kind of a more common approach, or looking at the distribution of posts, or looking at the whole model, because essentially we've taken quite a light touch steer in the past to try and not disrupt the existing relationships in schools. But if the funding is going to create disruption anyway, it might be timely for us to look not just at impact, but at the model, how many posts we need and where, and what that might look like over time. If there's no appetite for that, then then we can simply just look at impact as people have suggested. But there may be an argument for looking more, at standardized employment, or looking at a common distribution of posts across the piece. So it'd be helpful to know if anyone has a view of whether we should be considering that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess if there are people who would be willing to step into that space, is the easiest way they contact you directly, Amelia?
If anyone would be willing to be part of that conversation, if you can just drop me an email, it's just amelia.walker@somerset.gov.uk.
That's brilliant, Amelia. Rebecca Bennett.
Hello, it was just to say yes, I'd love to help with that, and I think even a sort of standard set of KPIs, bearing in mind we know that other parts of the sector are under such an amount of strain, so the work that FIS has to do is anecdotally at a much higher level. That's going to be true across the early help workforce, isn't it? So understanding if we're going to have a smaller resource, we need to be more targeted with it, and what kind of KPIs would be meaningful around entry and exit points, caseload management, all of those kind of things. I'd really happily be part of that conversation, Amelia.
I think it's really helpful, Rebecca.
Ruth Hobbs.
I think as well, we need to really understand the impact of the service, because I think, like you said, at the moment, there is no framework and it's very difficult for us to measure the impact. So that's something that we need to look at as part of this process as well, because if we're going to invest the money, our money is very limited in Somerset, and we need to be investing it in the right place and be confident that we're doing that.
I noticed there's a comment from Nick about amount of school budgets already being committed. I don't believe we know how much of total costs are being offset by schools, but that is something that'd be helpful to know, so we have a better picture of what the total financial arrangement is, what the distribution of capacity is, and as you said, colleagues, measures of impact and more standardization. So that feels very, very helpful, and I do appreciate people's views in that regard. If we can go back, Simon, we do need to take a vote on the CSSB as a whole.
Fine. And have you taken that as a steer on those two options, or do you want members to take a vote on that?
If we could do a vote on both, obviously, just taking soundings on PFSAs rather than a formal vote, but just to get people's steers from people who haven't spoken as well.
Absolutely. Right. Let's do a vote on Central Schools Block, and I'm assuming this is to agree it. I don't know the consequence if they disagree it, or to abstain. Okay. So. What is the consequence if Forum were to disagree on this vote?
Panic and emptiness.
That's because it's worth understanding the consequence of our actions.
It's a really good question, Simon. You remember that last year, I believe it was last year, the Schools Forum did not approve the early years budget, and we had to return back. We had to come back to Schools Forum to get that approved, and we did go back to the DFE and say, because we looked at the guidance quite closely to say what happens if a budget is not approved, and we were thankful that Schools Forum did approve our revised proposal. I think in this case we would have to come back with a revised proposal, because obviously we can't not have a CSSB. We need to expend it. We need to spend it, and we need to spend it in line with the guidance. So I think what we'd be looking for is if there if the view of Schools Forum was there was something that was fundamentally wrong with the proposal, we would, I think, have to come back to Schools Forum and maybe have an emergency meeting to bring back a revised proposal. Okay,
so Ruth Hobbs.
Sorry, I want a clarification point here. So the things that we've got on this slide, some of these were included in the funding requests that we had that we then said we weren't going to give the transfer over of the budget, particularly around attendance and that side of things. There's no double, I just want clarification, and I'm sure there isn't, that there's no double funding going on here. We're not taking it out of this instead of what we didn't agree.
Yeah, those would be high needs block proposals,
okay,
rather
that's
than
fine. It's
Central
just
Schools
because
block.
Some of the elements for this were also in that high needs funding.
Yeah, those were inclusion Viceline people and access caseworkers for the
that's
schools
great.
block. We've slightly tweaked that, but yeah, just to
Mm-hmm.
confirm that there's no double count. Yeah.
Fine. So I guess in terms of a vote, agree, disagree, and if there's a disagree, we'll unpick kind of there's a fundamental element. That probably is the simplest way to go, and obviously abstain. Okay, so we'll go to agree the Central Schools Block. If you'd like to raise your hands, please. Okay, Robin, have we captured that vote?
That is a unanimous vote.
That's fine. I think we could leave it there. Thank you very much. And now we need to talk about just if this is not a decision, this is kind of information to go into the local authority about the PFSAs. So there's option 1 and option 2, just an indicative sense of what people would like to kind of which of those options people would prefer. Can you please now choose option 1 and option 2? And we'll have an abstain in a moment. Okay, I'll give it a few more moments. And is all that preferences in for option 2? Thank you. Put your hands down, please. And any abstentions? Thank you. Okay, that takes us, I believe, to item 9, early years block, hourly rates and centrally retained funding. This item is for decision and consultation. I'd like to invite Phil Curd, Head of Education Places, to present.
Hello, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to take you through 2 items. The first one being early years centrally retained funding is item 9A. This is for a decision that will be followed by a link item, which is the early years funded hourly rates, where we will be asking you for an advisory vote as part of our consultation. So 9A, which is the centrally retained funding, the recommendation is that Schools Forum approves the proposed rate of 2.75% of early years centrally retained funding for the 2026-2027 financial year. Previously, we have retained 3% as a local authority, which is now the maximum that a local authority can retain. In 2024-2025, that 3% was worth 1.433 million. That increased to 2.192 million in 25-26 as a result of the extended entitlement and general uplift in early years funding in the local area. In 26-27, a 3% retention rate would be worth 2.581 million. But given guidance now prevents the funding being used for sustainability grants, we are recommending reducing the council's retention rate to 2.75% to ensure that all of its central costs are fully funded, while releasing more funding, which is £215,000 into the sector for hourly rates. This would mean that the council's centrally retained funding for 26-27 is £2.366 million. As part of our consultation ahead of this decision, we met with the Early Years Partnership on the 15th of January 2026 to discuss the proposed retention rate. A previous sector-wide consultation had set out which types of support the early years sector value most, allowing us to develop an offer of support funded from its centrally retained funding. In the papers for this meeting, in Appendix A for this item, you will see a detailed list of all the support that is provided to the sector by various council services and what we intend to provide in 26-27 as additional initiatives. It's acknowledged that within 25-26, there was a disruption to the support we were able to offer due to our organisational restructure. But as part of our consultation meeting with the partnership on the 15th of January, it confirmed its majority support for the 2.75% retention rate. So we did, as part of our work, consider other options. So option 1 would have been to retain the 3% retention or maintain the 3% retention rate that we've had in previous years. And as set out before, that would have equaled £2.581 million or an increase of £389,000. Option 2, which is our recommended option, has been set out for you already. Option 3 would have maintained the same financial amount of 2.192 million, which would have been equal to a 2.55% retention rate, but this would have been put pressure on local authority budgets already allocated to provide essential services and oversight of the early years sector in Somerset. So it was set aside. So option 2 is the recommendation. Just to note that centrally retained funding retention rates will be reviewed each year to ensure it covers the council's central costs, so may increase again in the future. Next steps. So from the 1st of April 2026, the sustainability grant offer will no longer be available to providers, and the ongoing impact of the council's offer support will be monitored by the Early Years Partnership and subject to another sector-wide consultation ahead of the 27-28 financial year. And that is item 9A, Chair. So happy to take any questions. I know I've got colleagues, sector representatives from the Early Years Partnership are on the call. They may wish to talk about the meeting with the partnership and that consultation exercise. Otherwise, happy to go to a vote because this is a decision for Schools Forum.
Yeah, thank you very much, Phil. Okay, can I take any questions or comments, please? Sarah Fennelly, or Sarah, apologies.
Thank you. It's Sarah Fennelly, early years representative, attending the partnership meeting last week. I just really wanted to echo in a sense what Phil's already said. Really, we did have some healthy conversations around the 2.75% retained funds, and they were discussed in detail. I suppose obviously it's the DFE have unfortunately taken away the sustainability grant that will be available in the next financial year, which is disappointing. However, we were reassured that around the third party and new initiatives that support would still be out there for those sort of smaller settings, because that's obviously a concern. The virtual school vacancies were welcomed by the partnership, and we're just really keen as early years settings across the sector to be able to have some face-to-face support, which unfortunately we've obviously not received as much, as Phil explained, in the slight disruption due to the restructure. So yeah, I just wanted to add that really. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Ruth.
Sorry, Phil, I'm going to ask a really dumb question now. So servicing the Schools Forum, the figures don't appear to have changed, and yet there is a change.
Sorry, Ruth.
0.046, and then it becomes 0.046, which is not a difference, but then there's a change of 0.9%. Am I being thick?
I think that's in the central school. That's in the central schools block, actually.
Right. Okay.
Ruth. Yeah, that's the central schools block. Yeah.
Okay.
Early years block.
Just. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I remember the number.
Thank you, Joe. I was completely lost. I was like,
yeah,
I don't know what
I just got a memory of the number. That's all.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? In which case, we'll need to, if you can bring the slide back up with the options on which we're voting, please. That's the recommendation. Did you have the other options? So the second one is the recommendation. I guess we'll take a vote on the three options and then also an abstention, and people can choose to go with the recommended option. Phil, is there anything last you'd like to say about why that option 2 is the preference?
It's because I think there are a number of factors. So it's recognizing that we are no longer able to offer the sustainability grant. It's also recognizing that as a local authority, because of the financial crisis, if you like, we need to make sure that the services we provide to the sector are fully funded by the grant, but take no more. We have to make sure we're compliant. So on balance, the recommendation was to reduce to a 2.75 retention rate and release a bit more funding into providers to increase the hourly rate. I think it's worth noting, Chair, that item 9B is around the early years funded hourly rates, and they are predicated on option 2, the recommendation of a 2.75 retention rate being approved, because all of the hourly rates calculations, which we're consulting you on today, are calculated on that basis. But yeah, happy
Okay,
to
well,
continue to vote.
let's cross that bridge when we come to it then, because I guess they have to make a decision, and then we'll work that through. Okay, so unless there are any other questions, we'll go option 1, option 2, option 3, abstain. So hands up for option 1. Okay, hands up for option 2. Okay, have you covered that? Robin, have you got that?
Yeah, that is unanimous for option 2.
Right. In which case we can move to 9B, Phil, based on the calculations.
Thank you, Chair. So early years hourly rates, item 9B. So this is for an advisory vote to approve as part of our consultation, and we'll set out next steps at the end of the slide deck. So having agreed the 2.75 retention rate, which is rather fortunate, the hourly rates for 2026-2027 have been calculated as 3 and 4 year olds to be £5.95, up from £5.71, or 4.2% increase. The 2-year-old funding up to £7.85 per hour, from £7.50, or that's a 5% increase. And then the under 2s rate is up to £10.62, up from £10.15, or another 5% increase. These base rates will be enhanced with a deprivation supplement where applicable, which is calculated by setting based on need. So the background, so our duty is to determine the local hourly rates of funded places in the early years sector. The funding provided to Somerset is set out there. It's worth in total £86.8 million this year. That's an increase of 13.172 million, up from 73.698 million last year. So a big increase of funding into the sector, all linked to the extended entitlement agenda, where there are more funded places for younger children. The local authority is permitted to retain up to 3% of the county's early years funding allocation. As already set out, we have reduced that to 2.75% this year, and the difference between the 3% and the 2.75% is 215,000, which has been allocated into the funding and used for the hourly rates calculation. So you can see there's just a table setting out more of the detail. What are the rates? What have they gone up by compared to the previous year? And then there's this element of contingency. So as we have done in previous years, our assessment of the DfE's funding allocation suggests that Somerset has been allocated excess funded hours, and we would expect the DfE to claw back some of the early years DSG funding in their adjustments, both during the year and in July 2027 at the end of year adjustment, reduce the rates payable to our providers for the hours that they claim. Other options considered. So had we have gone down the route of having a 3% retention rate, that would have reduced the hourly rates available for funded places. So you can see that the 3 and 4 year olds would have reduced to £5.94, the 2 year olds would have reduced to £7.84, and the under 2s reduced to £10.60. So a 1 pence, 1 pence and 2 pence reduction respectively. So, but we've ruled that out. We are going with 2.75% retention and the hourly rates as published. So next steps, we're consulting with you today. That will the outcome of today's advisory vote will go into the key decision paper that will go to the executive lead member for children, families and education, either in late February or early March 2026. That formal decision making process will then set the hourly rates and payment mechanism for the 2026-2027 financial year. So again, happy to take any questions, happy for Sarah to provide the view of the early years partnership. Otherwise, if we could proceed to an advisory vote, either in favour or not, or abstaining, please, Chair, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go to questions or comments. I just had a quick question then in absence of those, Phil. Just two things. Do you have it? Obviously, these costs are controlled by what you're funded. Do you have any idea of what the inflationary costs are like across the sector and kind of what the impact of this is?
So I have an idea, but we have some early years providers on the call who are much better placed to talk about it. A key factor for the sector is that much of the workforce is paid at or around the minimum wage. And of course, that increases at a level which tends to be much higher than inflation. So that's always a key pressure on the sector. But I'm happy to kind of allow Sarah or Emma to kind of take the floor and give you a much better understanding of the pressures they face.
Yeah, Sarah, please.
Okay. Hi. So I don't have precise figures for you. However, if we just do a comparison around the national minimum wage rise, which obviously does impact us quite some within early years, the national living wage rise, as we know, I'm sure is I say only 4.1%, whereas actually if you look at the apprenticeship rate at 6% rise this year, and the rise for 18 to 20-year-olds is a massive 8.5%, and this age workers, do work within the early years sector. So certainly the national minimum wage rise is a huge impact for us every year. It always has been within early years. Obviously, additionally, last year we had the national insurance increase, which has certainly impacted a lot of the smaller businesses. I oversee Little Discoveries Childcare Limited. We have 3 small settings. One of our settings over in Frome, near Frome, is a very small preschool, and it's considerably hard for us there to even break even, or to be in a deficit. So there are extreme pressures. I think the key thing coming from the partnership group, and I'm a lead within the community within Yeovil as well, is really the DFE guidance that was issued to us last year. If you remember, I think it was discussed at Schools Forum around settings not being able to charge anything additional around the funded prices. So literally what you see in those hourly rates is what we get. We cannot charge over and above that, and obviously our overheads are considerably more than that. We're only allowed to charge for food if we provide it, and if parents wish not to pay for that, then they don't have to, because it has to be a free place. I hope I haven't gone on too much, so I hope that gives you a little bit of an insight.
No, that's brilliant, and I think it's really important that's heard alongside the funding, in this forum. So my thanks to you. That was really clear. Robin, could you do me a favour? I don't know who Inquiries External is.
Simon,
that's Emma.
That's our other early years rep. That's Emma Sherman.
Sorry, apologies. Before I invited them to speak, I needed to make sure who were. Thank you, Emma.
Oh, hello. Yes, Emma Sherman. I also concur with what Sarah has just said in terms of the pressures across the board. In terms of kind of percentages, we're looking at kind of outside the funding, an 8 to 12% across the whole sector in terms of private fees going up. That's kind of supported by our kind of umbrella organisations like NDNA, etc., etc. So, in terms of what Phil has said, anything that can be passed on to providers in terms of funding per hour is really important. And I think on behalf of the sector, the 2.75% is appreciated, because it just does help to some degree.
That's brilliant, and thank you very much for that clarity. Okay, in which case you need a kind of a consultative vote on ours there, Phil.
Yes,
so
please, Chair.
It's kind of agree. Is there? I suppose there's a disagree or an abstain. So we will go to a 9B. Agree the hours proposed. The hourly rates proposed. Hands up, please. Okay, that's great. And if my counting's right, Robin, that's unanimous.
Yeah, that's unanimous.
Thank you very much, Phil. And thank you all to those members from early years who've spoken there. That's really helpful. And if we can go to, because I'm aware of time, I'm running slightly over, item 10, high needs block update. This is for information. Amelia Walker and Joe Curry to present.
Yeah, if you want, I'll kick off and then, or Amelia, do you want to? I don't mind. We haven't organised
do the
ourselves around
numbers.
this. Okay, yeah. I'll just run through it's only just a couple of slides, so I'll go through those and then Amelia can come in. So just to give you an update really on our high needs block budget process for 26-27. So this slide just sets out the budget for places and top up funding, and I did talk about this a bit in our meeting of at the end of November. So in terms of setting the budget for places, we have sort of two steps to this process. So we've completed the high needs place return, and that's for our academised schools, and that went in just before Christmas on the 5th of December. And then the remaining places is our sort of responsibility for our LA maintained schools, and that's completed. So we're working at the moment through setting the budgets. As you know, the place funding, the 10k per place, hasn't changed. I think potentially for maybe around 10 to 15 years, so that's still the same. That remains the same for 26-27 as in 25-26. In terms of top up funding, we're proposing to leave the inflation at 0% for 26-27, and that's, as Amelia alluded to earlier, we have significant budget pressure on the high needs block budget, and so at this stage we can't do any more at the moment on our top ups, other than just leave them as they were in prior years. However, the one area where we will be increasing the payments will be in costed plans. So for all costed plans, that's for mainstream, we have got some in special schools and improves. We do annually uplift those teaching assistant costs in our costed plans, so they will be paid in line with those pay increases. So there will be some increases where costed plans come through from January 2026. So that's the position on the top up funding for next year. And then in terms of the budget and the month 8 position, this slide, I already shared this once, but I have updated it for the month 8 forecast, and I have put in there now the draft budget for 2026-27 for the high needs block. So you can see in terms of the overspend on the high needs block, that's gone from £6.5 million in 2019-20, and we are up to 44.9 million now overspent on the high needs block as of month 8. That's the forecast as month 8. So we're 53% overspent in terms of our funding allocation from the DFE. And in terms of our draft budget, at the moment, we are looking at around £53.5 million overspent. We're still sort of just working through finalising some of those assumptions and things in that budget, and that is after taking account of the deficit management plan savings that went to our exec and full council over the summer. So you can see that we've moved adversely by around £30 million since our original deficit management plan. So it's under a huge amount of pressure, as Amelia said, tens of millions of pounds overspent. And there's a couple of things that have happened actually since we set that deficit management plan that's led to some of that variation. We've had a huge increase. I think it's around 30% increase in terms of requests coming through for EHCPs. That's continued to increase, and that's, I think, as a result of government announcements saying that, you know, potentially the EHCPs as we know them may not exist or may change. We don't know yet. We're still waiting for that government white paper, so that's resulted in a huge amount of demand coming through, which we're expecting to feed through to additional cost. The other thing that's happened is the statutory override has been capped, so I think stopped at March 2028, and we don't have any certainty yet from the government around what they're intending to do. They've said that they will fund local authorities' gaps, but we don't have any information about how that is actually going to work for local authorities at that point. And I think we've had, in terms of the delivery of the deficit management plan, we've got some slides on that, but certainly the delivery, the sort of bringing in new staff, that's been slower than we anticipated at the time in the summer. So that is where we are in terms of the numbers. And what I know, is there anything else you want to add, Amelia, to that?
Yeah, just a couple of points contextually. And in terms of that growth, as you said, we've in the region of 30% increase in EHCPs. Actually, the total volume of those that are going through to assessment has increased considerably more. So my last calculation was it was at 66% increase year on year. So I know colleagues will be aware of the delays in terms of EHCP timeliness. There's a question of just pure volume. There isn't any, you know, and everyone who is involved in public sector knows you can't increase anything by 66% from one year to the next without a huge injection of resources, and we have obviously the opposite of that. So everything that is coming under pressure is coming under pressure because the numbers are simply so big. And this obviously doesn't cover SEND transport, but we're seeing the same pattern there, and taking that through to council in terms of forecasting growth there, even though Phil is doing a fantastic job in making the system more efficient. So it's all just a numbers game, and everything is being, we'll look at DSG in a moment in terms of what we're trying to do to make the system more effective, but that it's just the numbers are really, really big. Obviously, some of the things that we would need to do to mitigate depend on government action. We don't yet know when there's going to be a white paper. Latest I heard this morning was that the government was saying that they would not be telling us about their high needs block treatment for this year until early in February. It's in view of the ADCS is that the white paper from their conversations is still scheduled to come out in February, or sometime thereafter. February would be good. Other rumours are suggesting June, so it's somewhere in between those likely. But effectively, those are the kind of the two key factors. It all boils down to, there's lots of other detail behind it, but it's pure numbers and uncertainty from the government in terms of treatment. That is the biggest inhibiting factor in us taking some actions. Those actions within our gift we're obviously pushing on quite hard.
Okay, so questions and comments. Susan Fielden.
Just to return to a point I made right at the top of the meeting when we were looking at deficits. During the course of the meeting, we've looked at an inflationary increase in funding for mainstream schools and an inflationary increase for early years providers. And if I'm understanding this correctly, for special schools and AP settings, given that the place funding is fixed, and we are also looking at absolutely no inflationary increase for the provision for some of our most needy and vulnerable children. Am I understanding that properly?
So obviously as Joe said, there will be an adjustment to costed plans. We have a very significant number of costed plans in special schools and AP at this moment in time.
Yeah, we do.
But we have, it's not within our discretion to alter the 10,000, which I know has been something raised by special schools nationally for many years. So that's something that's not within our gift.
But the level of top-up funding for special schools and AP settings is.
Yeah, only within the budget envelope we've got, which, as you can see, we're hugely under pressure in all aspects of every single category in the high needs block is under significant amounts of pressure.
I guess my point is that there's a decision here that points towards discriminating against the provision for those children in special schools and AP settings, and making it very difficult for those settings to deliver on expectations if their funding has not got any increase for inflation.
I think the reality is, Susan, is that the scale of the banding allocation across the system is so big. The total budget for mainstream schools is £33 million. So I think there has to be some accommodation somewhere across the piece. This is why we've asked the Secretary of State for the 0.5 block transfer, and that's why we're not proposing an increase to banding. There simply is not enough money to go around in any part of the system, and I think at every single area that we're looking at under high needs, the costs of everything is rising dramatically. The numbers are rising dramatically, and the money available is simply not enough to go round. So yes, I agree. There's an argument to say that, and that's not the only area where there's an argument to say that more money should be put into the system. There is no money to go round, and so I think we are all facing the same, you know, critical pressures, which is it's not clear how we can make any of this balance. And so, you know, I appreciate your comment, but there is simply not enough money to implement increases.
Louise.
Thanks. I mean, obviously, Amelia, in the spirit of what you've just said, I think we will acknowledge that, but we wouldn't be doing our jobs if we didn't raise the concerns of our specific sectors. I think from a post-16 perspective, to pick up on what Susan said, we've got an increased number of students this year that are not getting their full entitlement for funding, and therefore their opportunities, you know, their life chances are being impacted on. My other question or point really is around the request for place increases, given that, you know, we've got a significant increase in EHCP, 60% year on year. What increase have we asked for? And what is the current thinking around the plan B if that place funding request is not met? Because obviously then the money doesn't come into the local authority to reallocate out, because there's a growing concern from post-16 that we won't be able to go above the places that we're funded for.
So when you say what have we requested, what in relation to?
So how many more places have we asked for?
Right, so that's not the basis on which high needs block is determined. So as you'll be aware, the high needs block is under extraordinary pressure in virtually every part of the country. And when we've spoken to the DFE, what their response has been is, well, you're not the worst, which is no consolation. So we don't require, that's not the basis. So I understand how FE funding works. It's on the basis of, we've got a number of places and you fund us on the basis. That's not how high needs block funding. It's in the same way as schools funding, it's on a formula. And so they will count the number of children in the system. And then there's a formula that determines what our allocation is. So there's no negotiation in the allocation. It's a block formula that simply hands out money across the country, and it's really transparent that there is no part of the country where that formula is adequate, and the allocations in our area are particularly low. And there are some pressures, and we are working with regional colleagues. One of the things that is a significant pressure in the southwest is very low proportions of special schools. So our special school density is half that of the rest of the country. So we have a small number of special schools, and that's the same across many other areas, but also they're spread across quite a big area. So that has both an impact on transport with a very high expenditure council in terms of transport, but also in terms of our costs, because when our special schools are full, then they move into independent sector, and our use of independent sector is high as a result. So there's no, I think absolutely if there was any negotiation, we would be negotiating with everything that we have. That's not an option. We are simply given an allocation, and we have to try and work within it, which in the numbers that we have is simply functionally impossible. So I think, that I think for everyone, they're looking at what we are being asked to collectively deliver and say there is not enough money here to do what is required. I think if colleagues have other views about where we could reduce or bear down on funding other than where it's already bearing down, then all of that is open for consideration. But the reality is that anywhere that money comes out is a place where money comes out. And there isn't any good place for us to try and find £44 million that we haven't got. £44 million is a staggering amount of money.
I'm just going to interject there a moment. We are going to continue the discussion, but we have hit 3 o'clock, and my apologies to members. Normally we deliver the end on time. You can see the number of important items today. So I understand completely if members need to leave. The only items remaining are this one and the next, which are for information, and the information will come out separately and you can view the recording. And just to make you aware, the next meeting's on 10th March. So for those members who do have to leave because we've reached the end of the time, my thanks to all of you for attending. We will just carry carry on with these last two items for information. Sorry, apologies for stepping in. Hopefully everyone can keep the thread of where they were. I've lost track myself. So if we continue that discussion, and then I think we got Ruth and then Joe. Does that make sense? So if the members speaking want to carry on, and then we'll go to Ruth, and then we'll go to Joe Curry.
So thank you, Amelia. I appreciate that, and obviously I accept FE is different, and you know we operate in a different way. I suppose it is though just flagging, I think, and it's similar to other points that I've made. From an FE perspective, there is a concern that if the places aren't funded, it will then put pressure on young people having to go elsewhere or seek alternatives. I get that there is no more money in the pot, but obviously it's just a recognition of where those pressures are really being felt.
And that's fully understood. And I think we are all feeling the pressure.
Okay, Ruth.
So I suppose my question is, and just really to put this on the radar, is around the potential direction of travel. I think that's probably a good way of putting it. So it's very clear in the stuff that's coming out from central government, there's an awful lot of distraction happening at the moment with the white paper and what the white paper is going to be doing, not doing, bringing in, not bringing it in. But actually there is a lot of stuff coming up on the government websites around funding being held centrally for SEND, and there's not a lot of clarity. Have we had any direction of travel or any clarification at all from the DFE as to what that looks like? Because all it's saying currently is that from 2028 onwards, future costs will be managed in full within the overall government budgets, and local authorities will not need to cover SEND costs from their general funds. It's very vague and woolly.
It's very vague, and we haven't even had the information that we would expect to have, you know, in the immediate term. And so I think what we understand is that there may be some kind of negotiation. The key issue is the period up to 2028, because there's still hundreds of millions of pounds of deficit that are likely to be, that are forecast in that period. So it is possible that the government is simply trying to stop local authorities from taking their foot off the pedal in terms of savings. So there may be some political manoeuvring that is going on, the concern that if they said that costs were going to be met, that there would be greater expenditure than there would otherwise be, but we have had no clarification whatsoever on treatments going forward.
I was just going to mention as well that the high needs funding formula for 26-27 was actually based on 25-26, so we didn't really receive any sort of real terms increase in our funding, and the government had actually announced that they suspended their funding formula for 26-27, so they normally run it through some complicated funding model, but actually what they did was they just took 25-26 and rolled in some grants, so there wasn't a funding formula run on it in the same way that perhaps previous years might have been. So it's slightly technical, but I don't actually think we received any increase to sort of to cover our increases in demand year on year. Just didn't get anything.
Natalie.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's okay. My Teams did a weird thing when I turned on my mic. I was just wondering about the rationale between increasing costed plans and not top up funding for special schools.
Yeah, so we've always historically, in terms of the allocation, always done that. We have I think it's statutory requirement to meet the cost of EHCP. So where children need things like alternative provision and one-on-one teaching assistance, and we're required to meet those costs. So I think we've always had a policy to increase those in line with the actual costs, but for specific costed plans that attach to specific children.
Yeah, I can see that, but not for special schools where the costs are really similar.
Not for individual top-ups, no.
Yeah.
No, we haven't. Okay. We can't put anything on top-ups.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And at risk of making the meeting go even longer, so we've got a situation where there isn't inflationary rises in the the LA part of the sector, but in the independent part of the sector, we are exposed to inflationary costs if a provision is allocated.
Which is a source of pressure, and the inflationary costs have been above well, they're not just inflationary, but the annual cost rises have been above inflation in the independent sector for a number of years. So we are putting more resource into contract management to try and mitigate that, but it is a similar pattern that we've seen in children's social care, that the market is sometimes aggressive, and where we have been children have been placed as a result of tribunal, then there is no scope to replace, and therefore we have to pay, and there's very little room for negotiation in that. So that is it's just a widely regarded as a degree of market failure in relation to the independent sector, and there's been a lot of commentary on that nationally, but it does mean that local authorities are hidebound to the market.
Absolutely. Okay, any other comments, or we will move on to item 11? No? Okay, item 11, DSG forecast, including DMP update. Item is only for information, and Joe Curry, Strategic Business Partner Education, please.
Thank you, Simon. So I'm actually just going to take you through the first slide, which is the numbers, the financial forecast, and then I'm going to hand over to Rowan Griffin, who is our program manager, and presumably Amelia will also contribute to the sort of update on terms of the deficit management plan. So in terms of the forecast DSG position at month 8, I've already said that the high needs block was 44.9 million overspent. Forecast as of month 8, so that takes us to a position where we are forecasting a 107.031 million deficit on the DSG for 31st of March 2026, and that is approximately 8 million, I think, above the figure we presented to executive and full council in the summer last year for our deficit management plan. So that has come up again since that point, and that is really just to do with demand coming through the system that we weren't anticipating, and lack of places really. So a lot of that additional demand goes into high cost placements like independent non-maintained schools and EOTAS education other than at school packages. So I think we've said a couple of times, but we'll bring some more detail back in terms of high needs block breakdowns for forecast and budget to the next meeting. So that was just that's just the finances, and I'll hand over to Rowan if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, just a second. Hi there, is my mic on? Yeah, hi. So hello, I'm Rowan Griffin, interim program lead, SEM program lead, and have been brought in on an interim basis, basically to look at the DMP, to try and progress it, and to try and make the different cost mitigations that have been sought. So just for background, you will probably recall that in September 25, the full council approved the deficit management plan, and this involves a series of different projects, basically to make mitigations, growth mitigations, cost mitigations, to try and stem the extent to which this budget is growing. The types of projects involve everything from the work that Phil has been presenting on and doing on SEN units and additional school places, to looking at EHCP reviews and also negotiating with providers, to working on support internships and trying to promote more of those sorts of things, and also to stop post-16 EHCPs were no longer needed, and potentially put alternative support pathways in place. And then there are things related to demand management, so to speak, looking, for example, in the early years at more intervention with Section 23s and trying to stop things escalating later on. And then there is also a piece of work related on tribunals, and to try and reduce the number of tribunals through a lawyer and legal advice. So a number of different sort of practical things. And I do have a diagram which I probably should have added here. But so progress so far. So I've been here since just before Christmas, not that long, since the end of November. But we've basically what we've put together is we've tried to define a lot of these projects a lot more. So these projects weren't all fully scoped. So we've been working through that and how to do them, getting teams of people together to look at them and to make sort of practical ways forward. We also have a the Finance Oversight Board that we are reporting to, and we are in the process of looking at the governance and whether to revise that and to have a delivery board and also a member oversight board of all of this. So we need very, very clear governance and decision making around all of this. A key challenge with it, I think, looking through all of this, and as someone who's, from Somerset, but is an independent contractor here, so looking at it is obviously the challenge is very high. We've set ourselves some very high targets, and we're very ambitious in that way. So we may need to identify new targets to do different things. So I'm working with Amelia and others, scoping some ideas up there as well. So that's where we are at the moment. The targets are very challenging. We're trying to get the governance, we're trying to get the project planning, program planning in place, the resources to do things. That's where we are at the moment, and hope to give you a standing update each time at Schools Forum if that's of help to this group, Chair.
Absolutely, thank you very much, Ryan. Are there any questions or comments? No, in which case that brings our meeting to a close, and I've got a slight discrepancy between my notes and this one, so we'll go with the one on the slide of the 3rd of March.
Simon, your notes are correct. The next meeting is the 10th of March, not the 3rd of March. Apologies.
Okay, because I had a discrepancy between my two pieces of information. So let's start that again. Thank you to all the presenters for presenting, but also the notes that they've had to produce and the documents for today to make this meeting work. Thank you to all attendees. My apologies again for the overrun, and our next meeting will take place on the 10th of March. And I wish you all a good evening.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.